Hey everybody, welcome to my video presentation for Adaptation Futures 2023 conference, accompanying my poster, which can be clicked on above or below, wherever it is on this web platform, titled Power and Exclusion in Locally Led Urban Adaptation in Panorama, Colombia, Risk, Housing, Politics, and the Changing Climate. My name is Steffen Lajoie. I am a PhD candidate at the Université de Montréal in the Faculté de l'Aménagement, which is the faculty of the built environment. And I'm in the School of Urban Planning and Landscape Architecture. Now, over the next few minutes, this video presentation, I'm going to dive into some of the research context for the poster. Presentation, and it looks at getting a better understanding of who gets to adapt, how, and to what in informal urban neighborhoods of the Global South, and specifically the neighborhood of Panorama, Colombia. Like many of you, I come from a multidisciplinary background, and that has over time brought me to work on adapting to the climate crisis. My academic background is in anthropology, where I have an undergraduate. Later, I did a master's in development planning, and now I am doing my PhD in urban planning at Université de Montréal. So also professionally, outside of the academe, I worked in community organizing, human rights, local development in both North America, the Caribbean, South America, and West and Central Africa. My lens, have always been framed by human and socio-political perspectives. I apply that to responding to current crucial challenges in global development and therefore, more recently, the climate crisis. And in this case, I'm looking very specifically at locally led urban adaptation, planning, and informal communities of the Global South and how we could do it better. There seems to be two key challenges to locally led adaptation, particularly for vulnerable populations. In this case, an informal peri-urban community. One, from the policy perspective, getting money and resources to the people who need it the most vulnerable populations, not the easiest trick to do. And then also on a practical level, in terms of accessing and then mobilizing local resources towards the adaptation priorities that respond to both a diversity of needs and a diversity of people. And this is why I decided to build on research focused on perspectives and experience of inhabitants in Panorama, Colombia. This is a small barrio of just under 4,000 people. It's in the city of Jumbo, which is north of Cali, bigger city, some people might know it better, in Colombia. Now, I used ethnographic inspired approaches, employed in-depth personal history interviews that allow me then to work with different community groups to do rapid urban appraisal and participation observation. What I noticed right away in my research working with two groups is that they had very different priorities, mostly connected to how rooted and how established they were. New residents faced the immediate pressure to have shelter and a very limited amount of options, and certainly none that were legal. The older residents who had been through this other process that I just mentioned were more focused on meso or midterm or more macro neighborhood level concerns around the environment, around risk reduction, that were responding to those natural hazard needs like erosion, wind, air pollution, and so on through nature conservation. The state is also coming in on this and largely backing eviction and relocation strategies. So looking to relocate high-risk housing, or what they called officially high-risk housing, to other areas. Therefore, moving the problem somewhere else. Now, these strategies independently respond to important needs. One, informal housing construction, autonomous housing construction, whether it's independently, individually as a family, or collectively a group through the leadership of possibly an extra legal conduit. This is responding to very important housing needs. The housing deficit is extremely important, and shelter is one of the highest priorities for a family. Two, nature conservation. The nature conservation, protecting the green spaces, replanting trees, cleaning up water sources. This is helping protect the hillsides, the steep slopes from erosion, from therefore flash flooding, and also creating all kinds of important things like better air quality, reducing winds, and dealing with the heat. When there's heat and drought, there tend to be brush fires that again reduce the green space. But that means no build zones. And what a no build zone is you're protecting the green space. Locally in Panorama, the ecological foundation that I worked with wanted to reduce, if not stop, encroaching future housing construction. And so we can see how these two strategies become at odds, particularly when the state favors relocating or removing informal construction, which they deem immediately to be high risk. 3 times over the course of the research, I witnessed autonomous housing construction groups collectively done, coming in, raising a certain part of the green space, even places that I had collaborated in my participant observation, planting trees and so on, raising these green spaces, building houses, important housing, and then through advocacy and then the city support, being evicted twice. So 2 of these initiatives were then also brought down to the ground. The consequence in these cases is 1, the green space has been devastated. 2, those houses are removed. 3, the families find themselves back into the situation where they were, if not worse already, after investing time and money in their endeavor. Lose, lose, and lose. So what do we take away? Well, the families and individuals that I met are adapting to more than climate change. They're adapting to a much bigger context that fits in and connects with and is affected by the changing climate. And so the socio-political factors like lack of housing, like violence and conflict in rural areas, in urban areas as well, which motivate people to come and move into communities like Panorama, then look for housing. And there's a massive housing deficit. It's hard to find work. There's big economic pressure. Connect this with a changing climate. Connect this with a government that's less interested in working with and sees informal housing or new arrivals as a problem or as risky, as it were. And then we've got a mixture, the ingredients that come together and make what is the climate crisis. To respond to this, to support this, to engage in this as leaders, professionals, adaptation practitioners, we need to be able to navigate the frontiers of different formalities and different informalities. And this is true across the planet, because when you have one group who's sitting back and planning and thinking about their priorities, there's probably another group sitting back and thinking about their priorities. And when those two come to the forefront and their plans become more explicit, then what's going to occur is that they're going to be pitted against each other, or they could be harmonious. It's possible. It does happen. But in the case study that I looked at, it unfortunately was not. And so what happens is that it becomes a power play, and it means mediating between the two groups becomes, and it's a win-lose factor. And that's where mediating between the diversity of these different ideas is very important, Because what happens is the power differentials between individuals, between groups, whomsoever it is, then becomes a key deciding factor. And those most vulnerable, those generally have the smallest voice, have the least influence, certainly over state politics, if not community network and politics, will find themselves in positions of dissension, in positions of disagreement. And so they're going to have a disadvantage in this particular situation. And that is why that facilitating between these multiple actors is fundamental in terms of getting towards positive synergies and avoiding the types of negative synergies, the negating outcomes that we see in the case study that I worked on. And these are some of the guiding principles that can help us, that help me define who I am and who I want to be. What kind of cog am I going to be in the machine of adaptation planning, of locally led adaptation planning, as we adapt to the climate crisis together and move forward in a way that's looking for responses and solutions to a climate crisis that are both equitable and socially just. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoy the Adaptation Futures Conference 2023 and enjoy looking at and reading my poster. Thank you.